I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. My father was this famous football player, Ed Big Mo Modzelewski, number 36. When I was 8 years old, I would tear pictures out of magazines and I would write captions. So the writing career really started when I was a kid. And then I sold my first story to Sports Illustrated magazine when I was a sophomore in college about my famous father, the football player, losing his job to an athlete named Jim Brown, who turned out to be the greatest football player of the last century. I wrote it from a child's point of view because when I would play in the street in Cleveland, Ohio, I would wear my dad's football jersey number 36. And then one day my dad no longer played and he was replaced by Jim Brown, number 32. So I didn't tell my father that it was published in Sports Illustrated. And for Christmas, I rolled up the magazine and I put it in his stocking on the mantle. And it's the only time I've ever seen my dad, this big macho guy, cry in my life when he read that story. You know, big check came from Time Life and I go, wow, this is easy being a writer. You make all this money. Well, not always easy like that going forward. But I was hooked to be able to communicate and get letters from all over the world in response to something that you created. And then I was a journalist, traveled all over the world, freelancing, starving to death, but just making enough money to pay the bills to get the next assignment. And then when I met Genevieve, she was an angel with wings. She changed my life. And she introduced me to the man that owned a wild island in the Inside Passage, where we are right now. And I wrote my first book, and then everything exploded. Once I got to the Inside Passage, I said, this is it. This is what I feel in my heart. And I could spend the rest 10 lifetimes writing about British Columbia and Alaska. I've written 4 books. My first book was my first 2 years, primary in isolation, living on a wilderness island in the Inside Passage to Alaska, making the transition from civilization to the wilderness, where you're fighting the elements, you're trying desperately to survive in a totally challenging situation. So it's very much a survival book, motivational book on how to deal with change, what I learned from the Kwakiutl Native people, from all the animals as well. So that was my first book, published by HarperCollins in New York City. And then it was filmed by PBS for a special, chosen by the Nature Book Club, Book of the Month. And then everything just rolled along. Outdoor Life TV hired me to be a correspondent and a host and sent me all over the world to places like Patagonia because they had seen the book. Princess Cruises saw me do a TV show on Patagonia for Outdoor Life TV. And one day, someone from the corporate office at Princess called and said, called my agent and said, can we pay Michael to go on vacation every summer? I thought about it for 2 seconds. I've just had La Vida Loca, the craziest life. I lived on the island in seclusion, subject to my first book, 2 years, no dates, no females around, howling at the moon like a wolf during the full moon. And when my book was published in New York City, I came back to do some publicity and found out that for some reason Cosmopolitan magazine, the women's magazine that goes out all over the world, chose yours truly, for whatever reason, as one of their bachelors of the month. So I went from famine to feast. No dates for 2 years in the wilderness, and I had 5,000 letters from women around the world. Mongolia, Canada, you name it, all occupations. And in the bottom of the second mailbag, and each mailbag was about that tall, there was a letter from my wife. And when I read that letter, I said, I'm gonna marry this girl. Flew to Phoenix, Arizona, Christmas Eve. We started talking and we haven't shut up since. It's been a great meeting. Oprah Winfrey was doing a show on how couples meet in unusual ways. And I had gotten a lot of national press and newspapers and coverage and TV shows. And one of Oprah's producers called and said, we would love to have you guys on the television show. So at that time, the Bridges of Madison County, that book was being published. So Oprah did a live show, which is rare for her, in Winterset, Iowa, right by the covered bridges, which were the setting of Bridges of Madison County. And Oprah Winfrey bought 500 lawn chairs for all the Iowans to come and sit in the meadow. And Paula and I had about 10 minutes of camera time, and you're going out live to 400 million people around the world.
Paula was an ex-Playboy bunny, and Michael was a Cosmopolitan magazine Bachelor of the Month, and now married. She calls him the most romantic man in the world. Wait until you hear what goes on in their house. Champagne in the bathtub? Champagne in the bathtub?
Champagne and sushi in the bathtub.
And so what's the most romantic thing he's ever done?
Well, being a flight attendant like I am now, he proposed to me in the airport with a 25-foot banner that he made. And it said, "Paula, I love you. Will you marry me?" And he had all the passengers hold it up as I walked off the plane in my uniform.
Did you say yes right there? Yes.
I had to.
Yes. Yes.
No, I did.
I wear my Oprah Winfrey hat when I go into Africa leading safaris, and I've had Maasai come out of the bush shaking their spears going, "Oh, brah, oh, brah." You could be President of the United States, but that won't be on your tombstone. What will be is he was on Oprah Winfrey. I really want to maximize potential. That's what my whole life is about, what my writing is about. Taking what it means to be human to the absolute extreme. It's an absolute blessing to be here. And you know, my father in all of his wisdom, and it's so strange how the older I get, the smarter my father becomes, as Mark Twain said. When you're 17 years old, your parents are the dumbest people on earth. But every year, my father magically gets smarter. And he always told me that you're happiest in life when you have balance. Half of my year, I share stories on Princess. I go into companies and corporations, give motivational speeches, work for Discovery Channel, write books. So half of the year, I share stories, and the other half of the year, I go get new ones. Climb mountains, kayak with the killer whales. So I finally have that balance in my life, and happiness comes along with that. What I absolutely love about Alaska is it makes you feel alive again. I think in civilization right now, we're getting over-civilized. We're getting our reality through screens. So many of us spend so many hours a day getting reality through television screens, through computer screens. And our physical senses, our direct way of perceiving the world, it's going into sleep mode. So when you come into wilderness like this, you breathe this pure air. You see 100 miles in every direction. It restores you to your true best self. And Emerson, a very great writer and philosopher, said, "Be a good animal." And that animal side, with all of its wisdom and instincts, comes alive again in a place like Alaska. And so many people from all over the world that come on a cruise, just as brief as a week, they feel alive again. They feel a part of them that's atrophied or been buried, reawakening. And it brings vitality and it brings joy when you're in a beautiful wild place like this. When you're out here in the wilderness and you get away from town or city lights, the Milky Way is a racing stripe across the sky, and it's full of dust that's lit up. And you know the Van Gogh painting, this Starry, Starry Night? I never thought it was true, but the stars, when you can see them clearly, they actually spiral. All of the galaxies you can see satellites tracking across the sky at night. That's how clear and magical it can be. I think what makes the land so spiritual is that there's a perfect balance here. And you've got some of the freshest, purest air on earth. In fact, we had a passenger about 4 weeks ago. He was a yogi from India, and he had studied the mind-body connection. And he said, "Michael, if you could be a breatharian and just purely live on oxygen, not food, you could do it here in Alaska, because the air here is just so pure, and it is fed and oxygenized by so many trees and plants. Also, when you have salt water and you have mountains that are granite shot full of quartz, salt water against quartz actually produces an electrical charge, just like a battery, that comes off of this landscape. So a lot of people can feel that energy, very, very tranquil and very healing as well.